What's going on, guys? This is Christian over here, and this is going to be a video on how I pretty much do weapons. In this case, I am going to show pretty much my workflow. Everything I'm showing here, it's pretty much done differently amongst many sound designers over here. I'm showing you one way, and I'm sure many other sound designers out there do it a particular way, and I actually know there are alternative ways to do it. I am actually going to be using Weaponiser as the plugin over here. And basically, if none of you are familiar with Weaponiser, Weaponiser is pretty much used for layering different sources, different source recordings. And if you have a bunch of, samples or different source material you want to use, you can actually throw it in here in the file. And, obviously it just depends like where you save it, within your file finder. And Weaponiser can actually, you can actually export stuff from the UI over here. And then you could just pretty much stack, as you would in your DAW. And yeah, I mean, Weaponiser is pretty much used amongst other sound designers. Just because you don't have this tool doesn't mean you can't really make weapons. You'll just have to do your layering within your DAW. In this case, I'm using Cubase 10.5 over here. And yeah, let's get right into it. So I am using a famous, well, not really a famous clip over here. I am using a footage from Once Human that actually came out a few months ago. I actually know a few of the sound designers that worked on that game, which is pretty sick. Obviously, this video isn't me trying to show you how to make better sound design than Once Human. That's not what I'm here for, but I'm just kind of showing you how I go about making weapons. And first, my goal on this video is just to kind of show how I go about making weapons, in this case, gunshot sounds. And my first tip and advice, I would say, you really want to try to have great source material. The better the source material, the better source recordings you have, the better off, because obviously, from a music standpoint, if you have a great recording, then the less work you really have to do on the recording to make it to sound good. Like, you can't make a bad recording sound good with plugins. You just can't. So I highly recommend getting great source material. And even if you have a library from like Boom Library or Pro Sound Effects, anything like that, or even if you record your own stuff that you would say is considered top of the line quality, I would go ahead and use that. All right, so I pretty much have a Weaponiser already open over here. As you guys can see, I already got a bunch of samples or source recordings thrown in here. I put a little bit of thought, like what I wanted. If you kind of look at this footage, I'll go ahead and mute this pistol layer over here first. So if you guys haven't played Once Human, it's an open world third-person shooter. And just like any other open world shooter, anytime you shoot a gun outside, you want to do everything you can to make the weapon simulate the environment. So in this case, we're outside. There's a lot of trees. There's like a pond, lake type of deal over here. And that's the job of a sound designer. You want to get the footage, or if you have access to the game, and if you're working in the engine like Unreal or Unity, play through it, get an idea of the vibe of the project and the game. And, as our sound designer caps we have when it comes to making things sound great, we have to do everything we can to picture ourselves as the player. Like, what are they going to be hearing when they're playing? Sound design is an afterthought. really, for most gamers and people, because they just don't really think about sound design. The only time people really pay attention to the sound is either if it sounds really good or if it sounds really bad. And depending who you ask, there's not really a middle ground, but you really want to do everything you can to make sure everything matches up to the project. Otherwise, that is not good design. All right. So yeah, I have everything thrown in here. I'm going to do everything I can to go in depth of what I do and the moves I made, why I did what. So let's go. So this first layer is the onset layer. And pretty much the whole purpose of the onset layer is I added lots of mechanical type of sounds. So if I go ahead and solo this, and I just go ahead and play for you. As you can tell, it's very mechanical. And for most designs, when you're doing guns, I like to add and sneak a little bit of a mechanical. Some people call it the onset, some people call it the sweetener, and some people call it the wildcard layer, I guess. And the reason why they call it the wildcard layer, it's the layer that's supposed to be a very unique recording you got to kind of, add some originality, add some authenticity to the sound. My goal was to kind of make the gun a little bit mechanical. And obviously, if you crank up the gain on it, it could be a little bit, overpowered, but it really just depends. Sound design, you have to use your ears and you have to really just be like, is this too much? Can I roll it back a bit? So, and obviously you can't really have a clue how it's going to play out until you actually play the game. But, if you wanted, as true mixers, especially with music, I'm going to use music a lot because I also do a lot of mixing for music also. And if your mix just isn't great when you send it off to the master, then the mastering engineer is going to have to polish something that should have been done in the mixing, production side of things. So you really want to try everything you can to get a very healthy level mix with all your sounds. That way, when you throw into Wise or Fmod, or if you're not using middleware, that the programmers have a lot to work with. But especially when you throw into middleware, I mean, you could do the mixing with the Wise or Fmod, but I like to do my mixing mostly here. And if I need to tweak a little bit, I can just obviously level, lower the levels a little bit from there. But yeah, I have the onset and then the body. That's going to be the main meat of the sound of the gun. So I pretty much threw like a bunch of Dragunov close mic setups, a couple Winchester source recordings over here. And it's pretty cool because, you can, like, the cool thing about Weaponiser is you can actually throw in a lot of sounds in one layer. So instead of I put everything in 4 banks because I wanted to stack on top. If I were to throw these 4 recordings or these 3 other recordings into this bank, it would just randomize between all of those recordings that I throw in the bank. Kind of like Wise or Fmod. It randomizes the sounds, which is pretty nice. Okay, so that is the meat. And the body is like mid-range focus material. So I tried everything I can to get very meaty sounds, meaty gunshots over here. So, and then for the thump, it's a lot of low-end, bassy sub material. And this is actually what's going to give us the power of the gun or any weapon, actually. So every weapon needs to have some type of bass sound to it. And if it helps, I'm going to use music again because it will probably make more sense. When you're mixing a band, you have string instruments for the most part, right? Like your acoustic instruments, piano, guitar, right? That's going to be your mid-range focus material. And then the vocals, that could be something kind of a little bit on the airy side. It's still going to be the main focus of the song. So the vocals and the string instruments, they're going to be mainly the body of the mix. And then with your thump, that's going to be your bass, your drums, or low end synthy sub, source material. And then your onsets, like the top end, as well as your tail, like cymbals, any source material that has a lot of air to it. And what I mean by air, just a lot of presence focused frequencies that just add life and clarity to the mix. So if you think about it that way, that's basically what you're doing with all your sound design. Try to think of it that way. That's what I do. But yeah, your sub. So I only added 3 different sub material in this because when I added an extra one, I thought it was too much. And that's the good thing about layering is if you feel like it's a little bit busy or just over the top, you can always mute or subtract, take away, and stuff like that really goes a long way if you're not really happy with the overall product. So that's the sub frequency. And then the tail. The tail is very important because the tail is going to be the last thing that pretty much people will hear when they're firing the weapon. So this is pretty much what's going to simulate the outside. It's like that reverb, that outdoorsy reverb. And you can actually add an impulse response on here too. I think the reason I didn't add it is because it kind of didn't sound natural to me. Oh, it's an outside office corridor. So obviously, if you have any IRs that simulate outside or outdoors, I would go ahead and try that. But I didn't think it was really necessary with this because these sounds actually sound pretty good for outdoors. But okay. So the biggest tip, and this is the thing, you would think like, oh, I throw in my sounds, layer, because you can mess with the overall order and distance from those layers within Weaponiser. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. That's about right. Okay. So this is also where the sound designer, as you're designing your stuff, you really want to make sure everything sounds natural, like I said, but you want to play around with how this stuff is arranged because it really does make a difference. Don't do what a lot of people do. And just, just like layer, just match it up, Like don't do that. It's not a good thing. I mean, it kind of sounds cool. But the only reason why I don't recommend doing that is because you kind of take away the little nuances of the overall sound. So say if I were to just move the body like a little bit and then the thump later, like around there. And then obviously we want the tail at the end because that's the end sound of the result. And then get this. It's probably hard to tell, but compare that to, it's just like one thing, but like these slight movements, because you can even look at the waveform. If you were to do this in your DAW, if you layer that way, you get to really see what's going on, right? See, it just adds, you can tell, like I am able to sneak in that offset because that waveform is just a little bit behind the body. And the thump is slightly after the body of those sounds, adding a little bit of that power. And then the tail, obviously at the end, that's what's going to give people the credibility that, oh, this is outside, because there's a huge echo. But yeah, you can even go like really crazy with this and have the offset like way back. But it's those things, when you're doing this stuff, like that's the beauty of being a sound designer is you have freedom to like be like, oh, do I want to make this ridiculous? Do I want to make this somewhat hyper realistic? Or do I just want to make it subtle, and sneak in that offset? But like I was saying with the mixing, because I have the level around -12 dB, right? If I bump it up to like 6 dB around there, obviously you can hear the mechanical offset more. And it's almost like some sound designers will do that just to let you know, like, hey, this is a very like mechanical, plasticky weapon, like, but I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to make it a little bit more subtle, you know? So I want to put that here. I kind of like the body a little bit, like ahead of the offset. Okay. Sure. So come. So my tip when you're doing this, it's not so much, it's not enough just throwing all these sounds together, right? Like you have to do a lot of mixing, a lot of level matching. So what I recommend is if you're using Weaponiser, you have the ability to add EQ to your stuff. So for the offset, it has its own insert where you can add the EQ. And this is how I like to do things. Doesn't mean it's the only way to do things. I just prefer this way because I like to do subtractive EQ with this. And a lot of engineers and sound designers, most people will do subtractive EQ first, then they compress, and then they add like a very unique additive compression or EQ after that. So that's how a lot of people like to do things. Sometimes people like to do both subtractive and add, but I think it's a little bit cleaner, especially if you're doing surgical EQ. I would just do it from Weaponiser, because I did on the body a little bit too. Actually, this can actually be, where is it? Kind of had like a mid-range bump right there, but okay. Then on your sub, yeah, I added a whole high shelf with the thump. And you could probably add a low shelf. I would probably add around 35 hertz, around there. It sounds good. Lower that. Okay, so this is where our additive EQ has to come in. So yeah, I'm gonna add a shaper. You can add like a bunch of stuff on here too, which is pretty crazy. Let's see. Okay. Let's go ahead. Okay. Yeah, the shaper. You can pretty much shape how you want the body to sound. It kind of sounds cool, right? But we'll take it off for now. Okay, so this is where our EQ has to come into play. So I did my subtractive EQ. I'm actually using one of T-Rac's 1081 Neve style EQ. It could be any EQ you want to use. And this is just my opinion, but you know, sometimes when you have an EQ like this, it's good to have just limited options compared to like a regular, like, you know, what do you call it? EQ, where you have so much options or so many options. You just don't want to get overwhelmed and you don't want to use your eyes when it comes to listening to stuff. So I think it's good if you have an EQ like this because it really forces you to use your ears more than anything. But yeah, so for this, I added a low shelf at 330 hertz. And let's see. The reason why I did that, if I can, let's see. Pull up Weaponiser again. So 330 hertz is like a low mid type of frequency. And say I want to crank it, right? But honestly, the reason why, if I go to my thump, it actually sounds better actually when I don't put a low shelf on here. See, now it's ridiculous. Now it has a lot of bass on it now. So I can turn it back to like that. And sometimes, you know, in this case, I would probably use the high pass filter. High pass filters are actually the same as low shelves. Because it's all about the curve, you know. You use specific EQs like a Neve or API, SSL, whatever, for the curve, because you can't really replicate the curve on a traditional EQ. You just can't. I mean, you can get close, but it's still not going to give you those nuances of like harmonics, especially with these type of EQs. So even if I were just to roll it to like 27, let's see what that sounds like. Okay. 47. Yeah, I'll probably just roll it off at like 27. And I could probably bump it up to like a dB. Yeah, that sounds decent. And then, and like I should say, you know, the reason why I wanted to boost the 330 hertz and put a shelf on that frequency range is because, believe it or not, a lot of mobile phones like Android, iPhones, I mean, obviously, if you listen to their built-in speakers, you're not really going to really, you know, tell or hear the lower sub frequencies. So if you really want to get the bass to be more pronounced for mobile users, I would boost anywhere around 300 to 3 or even 400 hertz. That's like where phones are able to, you know, really produce sound in the low end or low mid. So that's just a helpful tip I've actually learned from a famous recording engineer. He actually used to do some stuff for Atari back in the day. So that was a pretty good tip. And then for the mid range, around the 1000 kilohertz, I only added just a subtle, I mean, you could probably add a dB. And that mid-range is going to give us a little bit of an edge. Just add a little bit more meat and body to the sound. Obviously, if you were to crank this up, it would kind of sound quacky. You know? So 1000 hertz, around 1000 to like 800, kind of mess around with that range. I mean, even 1200 might actually sound okay. Roll back to like dB. So yeah, like 1200, 1000 sounds pretty good to me. And then with this EQ, I can actually add a high shelf. And I did 6.8K because that's where the presence, I like it. Just add a little bit of top end to add, more brightness to the sound. Because when I didn't have it on, it just sounded a little bit too dark. And there's probably a reason for that, obviously, coming up too. But again, I have a reason why I did that, which I will show you in a second. But yeah. And if you add like 3 dB, when you're making EQ moves, when you're adding, don't get in the mindset like, oh, 6 dB, oh my gosh, that's too much. I mean, just use your ears, man. Like, this is the whole point of using an EQ like this. Just use your ears. If it sounds good and you're, obviously we're clipping right now, but that could be easily resolved with the brick wall limiter. But yeah, let's yeah, you can add more top end if you want. I just thought like 1.5 dB was like just a sweet spot, like how I like it. But yeah, that's how I like to use additive EQ. And compression. Oh boy, compression. Let's see. So the compressor I'm using is a fat style compressor. Without being too nerdy, fat compressors are really good for material that has very fast transients, especially on instruments like drums. Just anything that has fast transients. Any source material like that, fat compressor is going to be great for that. And I like the purple fat style compressor because I actually have parallel control. And what parallel control is, for those of you that don't know, is you can pretty much, take away a little bit of the compression signal. It's like a wet dry control basically. But the reason why I like parallel control on my compressors, a lot of people don't know this, and again, I'm going to do everything I can to explain all the little nuances of why I do what. But parallel control is important because depending on the source material, like say you got all your gun sounds from Boom Library, like most of those sound libraries, they sound great, right? But they're going to be compressed. They're going to have a lot of compression already. So you don't really need full 100% wet compression on a source material or source recording that already has compression on top. The only reason I like to still add compression is because I want to control those transients still. Because, with gunshots, they're very loud, they're fast, and I need something to control that if I can. So, really, I like to put around 30, even probably 25%, depending how much gain reduction I'm getting. But on this compressor, I have the attack set very low or very fast attack and a very fast release. And I think I'm hitting around between -5, -4 gain reduction. Yeah, it's just hitting like -5, -4. But that's where I like to be. -4 gain reduction or -5 for the loudest part. But yeah, I'm only literally adding 30% of the effect because I don't want it to be, because if watch, if I had 100%, you're gonna tell it's gonna be really overkill. And that, you know, that might sound good to some people, and that actually might work depending on the game you're working on. But I just think it's just unnecessary, honestly. Like, you can still get away just adding very, like, a quarter amount, you know? I don't know. Like I said, these are just things that I like to do. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way, but this is just stuff that I've done that sounds good. And yeah, it just really depends on the source material. But yeah, the reason why, and people are like, oh, that's why your sound sounds dark. Um, but any type of de-essing, any type of plugin that pretty much soothes. I mean, there's literally a plugin called Soothe. I don't have it because I just never thought I needed it. Maybe someday, I might use it on a future project. But T-Rex de-esser, it's an optical compressor. A de-esser is basically a compressor that compresses the high end. In this case, I can actually control which frequencies are going to get de-essed, which I like because it gives me a lot of control. But yeah, de-essers are used a lot for, harsh vocals, cymbals, strings, and even synth sometimes, like very harsh synth material. Anything that just like has like a very bright, like just piercing sound, I like to add a de-esser. So that way, it sounds a little bit smooth, doesn't really give you ear fatigued, especially if a player is going to be shooting guns for like the whole game. You don't want to fatigue their ears. So having something like this goes a long way, man. Just saying. See? It's kind of like, so I try to go for like a very subtle effect around -2, -4 gain reduction is where you want to be. I think I had it like around 6 hertz, kilohertz. Yeah. But I have the release kind of fast. I have it like barely below like 1, 100 would be like 1 on like a compressor like this. But yeah. Okay. So that pretty much showcases what I did. And obviously, we're peaking here. If you want, you can add like a brick wall, limiter on here. Let's see. You could do clean, maybe just do like, yeah, do that. See, now we're not clipping. It's so simple. How do you do it? Sorry, I'm having too much fun. But yeah, I mean, this is what the end result is. I already matched it up with this clip over here. I could show you. Let's see. But yeah, the end result. But yeah, I mean, this is, I put this together pretty quick. Obviously, if I put in more time into this, I could probably be very detailed oriented, but the most challenging part, as most of my sound designer colleagues would probably know, is sometimes you got to move on. If it sounds good enough, and I'm not saying like, oh, just do the bare minimum. Obviously, if you're not happy with it, fix it, tweak it. Because if you're not happy with it, chances are the player and the client you're working with is probably going to feel the same. So just do what excites you and you will pretty much be all right. If you guys like the video and you like this kind of style format of how I do things, please leave a like, share it with any sound designers or anybody who wants to learn some basic sound design. Feel free to check out my YouTube channel, subscribe, and we are actually on Rumble as well, and follow me on there. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, just reach out to me on my website. I will put those links in the description. But yeah, you guys have a good one, and I will see you guys on the next one.